Welcome to the Reading Rift. I'm Lydia,
And I'm Beck.
and today we're interviewing Veronica Bane, author of Instant USA Today, bestseller Difficult Girls. This is a little bit about Veronica, okay? Veronica Bane spent her formative teen years working on a popular theme park. Following days spent as a princess and an usher, she graduated from Chapman University with a BFA in creative writing. Since then, she has worked as a high school English teacher in Lincoln Heights, California. When she's not writing, she's exploring Los Angeles with her husband and their beloved dog, Bodie. Her debut novel, Difficult Girls, was an Instant USA Today bestseller. Okay, thanks for being here, Veronica.
Excited. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to fangirl and yap about your book. So,
Yeah.
first, we're going to kind of get the background. We want to learn about what was your journey to get to, oh, I'm going to write a book. Okay. So, first question is, did you grow up in a household where everybody was reading a lot, or did you kind of discover books by yourself?
I'd like to say that I grew up in a storytelling family. I am one of four kids, and everybody likes to yap. Everybody likes to tell stories. And my dad loves to tell stories. My mom loved to tell stories. And we also were a reading family. I know that I was of the era where I was chasing things like, the pizza party or whatever it was where you would get like stamps for reading. And I'm also incredibly competitive. So anything like that was a reading competition, I was all about. But I also just loved disappearing into stories. So I would see my mom reading the newspaper every day, and she would usually have a different book. But I loved kind of reading anything that I could get my hands on. And it was definitely a reading environment for sure.
That's awesome. And growing up with a background like that, I'm sure you've read a lot of books and a lot of authors. So who would you say are your like idols that are authors and like books that have shaped you?
Well, I think a really modern example is Suzanne Collins. I think every author kind of dreams of the idea of you just kind of throw a book out into the world that's really great every few years and then you disappear into, I want to say the wilderness. I don't think she actually lives in the wilderness, but it feels like she just kind of appears every few years to grace us with a great book and then leave. And I also just adore her writing. I am also a high school English teacher, and I've taught creative writing for a number of years, and I teach the Hunger Games. And it's just incredible how well it holds up as an example of how to write a book and how to tell a story. And I think there's just so much. I love what she does with her stories and how she does it in a way that you don't even realize you're kind of being taken for the ride that you're on until you've read and you look back. And I love that. And then as a kid, I loved Anne of Green Gables. I I kind of gravitated towards any bossy, whimsical, imaginative female protagonist that there was. I loved a girl who was getting into an argument with a boy, and her and Gilbert were, I don't think I would have called them this when I first read it, but my original OTP of just was like, yes, this is it. This is 100% what it should always be.
I love Hunger Games. That like ruled my middle school years, and we're actually gonna reread it together.
Because I haven't read it yet.
So we're gonna reread it
God.
together, leading up to the new movie coming out in November for like the most recent book. So I'm gonna introduce
By the end of this year, I would have read all of Hunger
It
Games.
will be a Hunger
I'm
Games.
gonna
I, I can't wait for you to go on this journey because have you seen any of the movies?
I've seen like the first half of the first movie. That's
Okay.
it.
So, because when I have my students will come to me, some of them have seen the movie, and but some of them have nothing. But even the kids that have seen the movie, there's so much more in the book, and no shade to the movie, but the book is just light
Better.
years better. And watching certain moments, because I'll read it aloud to them, and so I get to kind of like peek over the book as I'm reading, and we get to certain parts where they're just literally gasping for air and like, I don't want to go to my next class. I want to keep reading. So I'm so excited for you to have this journey.
Literally, high school English goals is to read Hunger Games in class. Love it. Love
It's so
that progression there. Okay. Was there a teacher, a librarian, maybe a idol figure in your life growing up who influenced your early years of reading and writing?
Yeah. I mean, I think I remember my elementary school teachers reading aloud to us. I remember very formative, moments of being on whatever carpet it was they had, and listening to the BFG or whatever we were being read aloud. And that was, I mean, that was peak. I don't honestly have any other memories of elementary school other than I think, whatever random child drama I remember, but in terms of class, I remember like being on that carpet, hearing new stories and being like, this is the best. Life is peak right here. And then in high school, I thanked all of my high school English teachers in my acknowledgments because I would not be doing what I'm doing without them. And I am so grateful that they introduced me to books and stories, but also they told me how to be a better writer. And then I went and I studied creative writing at Chapman, and I'm grateful for all of my professors there who pushed me and helped me be a better writer.
That's amazing. Honestly, I'm gonna get my English degree too soon, so like I'm excited for that. For you though, why did you think it was meaningful for you to pursue the English degree and then also become an English teacher?
I did not go into college wanting to be a teacher. I went in pursuing a creative writing degree specifically where we had to take English classes as well, but I went specifically for creative writing, and then towards the end, I think it was maybe my second year, I started thinking maybe I would want to be a teacher, and I thought maybe I would want to be an elementary school teacher. You had to take some of the same classes in order to be an elementary school teacher as to be a high school English teacher. And I had a class with a professor who pulled me aside after a few classes and was like, "So you don't want to be an elementary school teacher, you want to be a high school teacher?" And I was like, "I do." And she was like, "You do. You do." And looking back, I have no idea why I thought I would want to be an elementary school teacher. I am not crafty. I am patient, but I am not, I think, the level of patient that you need to be to teach like young children,
Yeah.
and a lot of sensory overload there. There's a lot of sensory overload teaching high school too, but I think that the conversations I get to have with my students and where I get to push their thinking and things like that, just that professor was right. That was far more in my repertoire than than I think teaching elementary school would have been. So I'm glad that I ended up teaching English, and then I just I've always wanted to write, and I did not see any other option. My poor parents. I was just like, I'm writing. That's what we're doing. And so I think they were relieved when I decided I was also going to add teaching into the mix,
Yeah.
but I was full steam ahead on writing.
They're like, thank you for the element of security. But
No,
I
not my security though. I said, but I like being a teacher. So,
right. I love my English teachers in high school, and I just remember my AP literature teacher my senior year. She was like who everybody leaned on to kind of get through senior year, and I just love when a student is able to have a teacher that understands them and like pushes their love of learning instead of like this is what we have to learn because it's what we're supposed to learn. But it's like we can love books, we can love stories, we can love writing. It's not about the three paragraphs, or it's not about all those technical things. It's about let's love this and let's figure out how to be good at it, learning the rules, but let's also love it at the same time. And not all teachers do that, but I think it's in the vibe that your students love it. Okay. When did you start writing, and what do you remember your first attempts at writing to be about?
I was 7 when I remember I got to read my writing. I had written, or I think I was either 6. Oh God, my students would be saying 6, 7, but I was 6 or 7 when I, sorry. But I was around that age when I remember writing a poem about my sister's new puppy, and I got to read it in front of my class, and I that was it. I was like, not only do I get to write this, but people have to listen to me. This is fantastic. Do this forever.
Love that. Yeah. And during all of this, when did you realize writing was more than just a hobby and you wanted to pursue it as something to, make money from?
I I always knew that I enjoyed writing, but I started to see that other people enjoyed reading my writing also at a young age, but I'm sure it was a little bit of like, adults just being like, hey, this is like, let's encourage this child's love of storytelling. But I mean, I look back at, baby me and when I was 18 and deciding on what college I was going to go to, and I was going to study writing, and I think that I knew I wanted to do this as a job, and that I wanted to be able to put my stories out into the world. I think there's a big difference between authors who write, for their own joy and as a hobby. And I think there's absolutely a place for that. But then there's also writers who want their stories to be read and responded to. And I definitely fall into that second camp.
I think that's amazing to be able to take a hobby that you love and then people like equally enjoy reading it because it's like I, as myself as a writer, it's like you just want people also to enjoy what you wrote. So it's like you're putting your heart on a plate, giving it to them, and like, please like it.
Oh, I mean, honestly, I think one of the most encouraging memories I have is, speaking of the Hunger Games, I wrote some Hunger Games fanfic in college. And I still, if I am ever doubting my writing ability, I will go back and look at the comments of people being like, this is exactly what I wanted the book to end with. And you sound exactly like Suzanne Collins. And I love this, best fic I've ever read. I mean, and I'm just like, that, yep, I want that all the time.
That's amazing.
Well, that kind of leads into when we researched you and you had talked to us a little bit before on social media that you have a background in ghostwriting. So
Yeah.
you have written books in the ghostwriting spectrum, right? Okay, we want to know a little bit about that. We want to know, first of all, for people that don't know, what is ghostwriting and how did you get into that?
Yeah, so first off, ghostwriting is essentially where you are given the general story outline, characters, setting, etc., that another writer has the idea of, and they give you those tools, and then you take it and you turn it into a book. So, you might be familiar with ghostwriting from the songwriting world. It kind of makes, I think, a little bit more sense for people who don't understand the concept of like someone else wrote the words and this person sang the words, but they said that they also wrote them. And it's the same thing. Generally, ghostwriters do not get credit. Sometimes, if it's a celebrity memoir or something like that, you might see the celebrity's name, and then underneath in smaller text it'll say like in collaboration with. That's a ghostwriter, but they're getting a little bit of credit. But generally, you're a ghost. You come in, you write the book, and then you are done with it. And a lot of people will say, well, why? Why would someone do this? But a lot of people have stories, especially if you think of celebrities, they have stories that they want to tell, but this is not in their skill set, and so they will go to someone else to write it, and then they will add their voice to it. And then sometimes when I've written for New York Times bestselling authors, they have gotten so successful that they no longer can kind of match the desired output that fans have for their work, and so they bring in a ghostwriter to kind of meet that demand. And so to the and then to the secondary question, how did I get into it? It's a very long and winding journey, but essentially about 10 years ago, I had written a YA contemporary that got me a literary agent, and I was so excited. I was like, this is it. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to be successful. And obviously we were 10 years later. So I was not successful in the way that I hoped. We went out on what's called submission to editors, and the book just did not ultimately sell. We got interest from one editor to do a revise and resubmit. I revised, we resubmitted, and she said, essentially, I think I'm making the book worse. Always a great thing to hear from an editor. And so I did what we are told as authors to do, which is I went back and I rewrote, or not rewrote, I wrote a new book. And I kind of set that first book off to the side, and I said, okay. And I ended up falling really hard for the new book. I was like, oh, I love this voice. I love the character. I love the story. And to the point where I was like, you know what? I don't even care if that first book doesn't sell, because this book is clearly the book that I'm in love with and that I want to be the one that we send out. And I had essentially finished the first rough draft, and I told my agent I'm working on this. And, she was like, okay, we're going to wrap up submission on the first one and just see where we are. And And then a couple things happened in rapid succession. I went on my honeymoon, and my mom died suddenly while I was on my honeymoon. And I came back in a little grief ball of just not knowing if I would be able to, keep going, because grief really has a way of kind of wrecking you and putting you in place. And then my agent said, "Hey, I'm leaving the business." And so I was really like, I don't know how I'm going to keep moving forward. But I also knew that my mom would have been like, "I did not send you to writing school for you to not keep going." And so I was like, well, I have this book that I love and it's basically done. So let me polish it up, jump back into the query trenches. I did. And I ended up getting a second agent, and she also loved the book. And we went back out on submission with that book, and we made it all the way. A lot of people don't know that when you go on submission, it goes to an editor. Then the editor has to go to their editorial team. The editorial team has to say, "Yes, we also love this book." And then after they say they love the book, it has to go to acquisitions, it has to go to sales and marketing. And we got told this type of book doesn't sell. So it made it all the way up there. And then I was crushed again. And now I really didn't know if I was going to be able to write a book, because that one book I'd been able to put together, I'd had all of it essentially before my mom passed. And now I was going to have to do it from scratch. So I wrote this really weird book that was very raw and had a dead mom in it, because I was clearly working through some things. And by the way, to anyone that's like, she seems a little like I'm laughing about it, I think you have to laugh about grief when you've gone through it. And so I promise I'm okay. But if that kind of dark humor makes you uncomfortable, I apologize in advance. But that is definitely my coping strategy. But I put this weird book together. I took little pieces of the job that I had when I was a teen. I had three protagonists. It was very weird, very sprawling, and very raw. And I went and I took it to my agent, and she was like, maybe not this one. And I was like, I agree. We're going to put this one in the drawer. And so I wrote another book. And I just kept writing books, and we kept going out on submission, and we kept just hitting walls. And my agent, I knew she believed in me, and I knew she believed in my work, and it just felt like the timing wasn't right. We would get feedback with things like YA is dead, and there's not a lot you can do with that feedback. And so I told her, look, I will do anything. I will write anything. I will take any kind of job. I just want to be writing. And so she said, well, what about ghostwriting? And I said, sure. That sounds like fanfic, but I get paid. So let's try that. And so I got into it there was an audition for a very small ghostwriting job. And it really did feel like fanfic, especially because this author was someone I'd actually grown up loving. And so I wrote the audition, and I got the job. And then from there, it just became like another little job, and then a bigger job, and then a whole book, and then multiple whole books, until I had ghostwritten. That's why I always say over 12, because I've ghostwritten small things, but I've ghostwritten 12 books. And after I had all that ghostwriting skill was when I went back and I took that weird book that was like the grief ball out of the drawer. And I was like, you know what? I think I can do this now. I think I have the skill. And I revised it, and I went back to my agent and I said, hey, I think this is actually it. And she took it out to my dream editor, and the book sold in about 2 weeks. And that book was Difficult Girls. So
That's
that
amazing.
I was
So yeah.
that's where that story was going.
Yes.
And then I sold nothing.
I was hoping it was going to be you. Give you that. I was like, okay, that's so cool. That's such a realistic representation of traditional publishing. I think sometimes it's like, I wrote my book, I'm gonna query for a few months, I'm gonna get an agent, and then I'm gonna like sell my book, and I'm gonna get published after that. But everyone that I talk to is like, it is such a process, and everybody's stories are so different on how they got there. So
But there's one consistent, which is there's always a wall, and there's always so many
Yes.
walls that you have to meet.
I mean, and I love the people who have the story where it's quicker, and they do exist. But I will say that, to what you said, most of the stories that I've heard involve some kind of resilience. So
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
did anyone on your path of English degree to I'm gonna write, or creative writing degree to I'm gonna write, did you ever have anyone doubt you, or did you doubt yourself, and how did you handle those doubts?
Oh, I mean, I had so many people close to me, you know, not close in terms of friends, thankfully, though some leaning in that direction, just be like, if it hasn't happened by now, like, and I had plenty of self-doubt too. I remember there were multiple walks that I went on with my husband because I feel like I would always get bad news and we would go walk the dog and I would just be like, I don't know how I keep doing this, but he would always just look at me and be like, well, you're going to keep doing it because this is what you want to do. And it's true. I didn't have kind of an off switch where I think by the time Difficult Girls came out, I think I'd written over 20 books, including my ghostwriting books. And it's something I love. And it's something that, we would get notes that were like, Veronica's incredibly talented. And so it didn't feel like something I wanted to give up on because it felt like there was evidence that if I kept going, we would get there eventually.
That's amazing, and you clearly have that resilience to like keep going, and that shows there. What was the moment that you would say you knew that you made the right decision for your life path?
I mean, I think honestly, when the ghostwriting books started coming out, that was also fascinating because it was a little bittersweet because they were doing things like they were on talk shows, they were on billboards, they were, you know, at festivals, at conferences, things that I had dreamed of for a long time. And they were there, and the authors were there promoting them, and people were talking about how much they loved them. And, I would be scrolling Instagram, and an influencer that I follow would be talking about a book I ghost wrote and how it was their favorite book of the year. And so that was interesting because it was like, oh, well, so it's not the writing. The writing is clearly something people like, but it's me. Like, people don't want me, which is not, but it was the thought that I had where I was like, oh, I'm the problem. But, but also, that was a fleeting thought of I had that thought and then I had to say it just has to be the right book. It has to be the right time. And you're going to have to hustle for it. And so in a way I felt like, okay, I've made it, but also I'm ready for my turn officially.
Yeah. Yeah. For Difficult Girls, so we know you wrote a version of it, and then you had a big time gap, and then you wrote the version that was able to then get the deal. We want to know your tips. Your writing expertise is how do you finish a first draft of a story? What are your methods for maybe plotting or for just getting the first draft done?
So one thing I tell my students all the time is you can't edit what doesn't exist. And I think I want to say it's maybe Shannon Hale, I could be getting this wrong, but has a quote about how you just have to put sand in the sandbox and then you can make it into the castle. And that really resonates with me. You have to get it on the page. You have to let it be bad. And kind of once it's there, or your version of that, because I will say I'm a fairly clean drafter in terms of the quality of the writing that comes out, but that doesn't mean that sometimes whole scenes don't need to be scrapped. And so I think just getting it down on the page so I can see all of it, reading it aloud, and kind of seeing where I lose interest if I'm reading aloud so I know what to cut. I am someone who plots before. I think thrillers, you have to. I'm sure that there are plenty of thriller authors who do not, but for me, I have to know where we're leading. I have to know what the mystery is. I have to know, what are the red herrings. That does not mean it does not change. There are multiple characters in Difficult Girls who died in one version, don't die in this version, did not die in the original draft, really die in this one, and so like super dead. So I I changed a lot, and really, as I mentioned, it was 3 points of view when I first wrote it, and that was one of the hardest revisions I had to do was when my editor said, we think this is actually just Greta's story, and we don't think you need these other two POVs, and I was like, obviously you're wrong. I didn't say it in those words. I respect my editor, but I was like, no, I don't think so. And she was like, well, just do me a favor, rewrite it from just Greta's perspective first so that the mystery clearly unfolds all through hers, because I was using the other POVs as basically as crutches to kind of hold up the story and kind of give thrills through their POVs, but they weren't really earning it. And she said, just write the whole thing from Greta's and then we'll come back and you can add in those other POVs after. That way we know the story stands from Greta's perspective. And I said, fine, I'll try it. And so I did. And then I got to the end and I went back to add in their POVs and I was so mad because she was right. And the book did not need their POVs at all. And I was furious. I was like, what are you talking about? But I'm really glad that I was open to that feedback because she was absolutely right. And I think I was just scared to let Greta, who I love, but who I know is hard to like, kind of stand on her own. And so I think to the original question, part of your process has to be feedback, has to be being willing to try things, has to be knowing what's important in your story so that when you take that feedback, you don't take all the feedback, but you do take what is important and you know the essence of what your story is. And essentially, she was guiding me to see that my story was Greta's story and I wasn't really letting her shine the way she needed to.
That reminds me of my husband. We were just working on one of his books that he's getting to about to start querying for an agent. And we just took out like the first 5 chapters of the book and started the book in a different place. And I remember watching him click the delete button, but it was all backed up like 4 times. But he clicked the delete button and he was just like gasping. But then we were all of us were together and we were like, oh, that is the most epic start for this book now. But it took me a year of editing and stuff of him like refusing to make that change, and then he did it and we're like, this is so powerful the way you just did that.
Yeah, taking all that out and like restarting. It's always interesting to me to hear where an author like started their book and how it, ended up and was published. And because it's like, looking at a book, you wrote 20 chapters and like those 20 chapters are not going to be in the final draft. And it's just like, what happened? But it's a great book. So it's like, you did the right thing.
Well, and I think too that one of the when I had Difficult Girls, when I came back to revise it, one of the reasons I went back to revise it is because I had a friend who was a professor and they had an editing class and they said, do you have any old manuscripts that you shelved that I could have the kids, not kids, they're kids to me, but these are full adults, they're in college, but practice editing with. Like they would do, and I said, yeah, I got this weird book from, I think at that point it was 7 or 8 years. I said, you can try this one. And there was a lot of good feedback that came back on that book that made me be like, oh, maybe there is something here. And so I think you need to be open to the stuff in your book that needs to change, but you also need to be open to the fact that there is good stuff in your book and it may just need to go in different places or be moved or things like that. I know my book that I have coming out this fall, We're All Going to Die Tonight, ! Is a book that it was born of a 1-sentence pitch, but it takes 2 characters that were in a completely different manuscript from 2019 that I had not just shelved, but like thrown so far back in the closet because I was workshopping that book with a group of critique partners, and they were like, when something's not working, but we can't land on what's not working. And I had no idea what to do. And I remember crying after I left a critique session, and I was just like, I don't know what to do with this book. So it's dead. This one, I was like, this isn't just shelved, this is dead because I have no idea how to fix it. And then now I realized those characters belong in this book, We're All Going to Die Tonight. And so that's where they live now in a completely different story. And I could take nothing from that book for the story except the 2 characters. But I'm so glad that they belong in this book. So
what did you learn from ghostwriting that you believe gave you the edge? So when you went to go publish your own book, that ghostwriting kind of translated over to that.
Well, with ghostwriting, you really do not have time to question yourself in that usually sometimes I would have only 2 weeks to write a book. And so there was no like, oh, I wonder if I do this or I wonder if I go this way. It would be, nope, you have 2 weeks and you need to follow kind of the general outline and you need to make the outline work. And so trusting that I have the ability to tell the story, I think was key. But then I would, when I wasn't ghostwriting, obviously I would have the freedom to be like, okay, the outline says this, but my heart says something else. I can change it. But just that ability to write fast, honestly, was huge. And just I ghost wrote a lot of romance. I ghost wrote across genres. I did fantasy, sci-fi, contemporary, romance, as I mentioned, and I think one thing about romance is everyone knows where the characters are going to end up. You're guaranteed a happily ever after, but the journey of how to get there is completely different. And so I think then going to thrillers, no one knows how it's going to end. That's the point. But how do you still make it satisfying and make the audience feel like they went on the ride they wanted to go on?
Yeah.
So your book, Difficult Girls, it was an instant USA Today bestseller. And can you just explain what that means, like to aspiring authors? What does it mean for a book to be a New York Times bestseller or USA Today bestseller? And my husband wanted me to ask you, is that like a goal an author should have? Is that like a good representation of, okay, my book is going to do well or is doing well? Or is there a better goal for an author to have in mind for their measuring their success?
You know, it's a hard thing to say. And so I'm going to be honest. So to give some context, there are basically three major lists that an author may try to hit during when their book is out. So the New York Times is the one that most people know. That's the big one. And then you have USA Today bestseller, which, and there, it's just who's publishing it. So it's the New York Times versus the USA Today. And then there is the indie bookstore bestseller list, which is strictly, it was a bestseller at indie bookstores. The way that the lists work is just slightly complicated because it's all based on which bookstores report their sales, when did they report. There's some weighting involved depending on, and weighting, WEI, etc. In terms of some bookstores are weighted more heavily than others. Depends if you have numbers coming in from Target, Walmart, Amazon, etc. The USA Today, for example, is paperback and hardcover for some of its lists. And so it really depends. Kind of, you have to look at the specifics of what is the list composed of. So for example, the New York Times is strictly going to be hardcover, and it's going to be based on the sections that the book is in. So for example, mine is a YA hardcover. And so there is also a degree of curation to the lists. And so there are books, and that curation can kind of come from where certain things were being weighted. Like if your book sold a ton of copies at a bookstore, but that bookstore didn't report, that can impact things. So it's very complicated, but that's why a book might hit one list and not hit others. And so for me, I'm incredibly grateful that it hit USA Today bestseller. That was a goal of mine. I feel like for me, I was always thinking, well, if I strive for that and I don't hit it, then at least I still made an attempt to sell these books. And I feel like some authors that isn't a healthy goal because so much of it is outside of your control. Like I mentioned with the curation and with other things, like you may have the numbers and you may still not hit. And that can be really hard, or it might be just that you are in a really tough week. There are certain weeks that are harder to hit the lists on than others. And so, because they're numbered. So for example, the New York Times bestseller list 1 through 10, the 10th book for January 6th, because books come out today. The 10th book might sell 1,100 copies. And then next week, the 10th book might only sell 700 copies. And so if you had a book, it would be easier to hit that second week, but you don't get to control when your book comes out if you're traditionally published. So it might not be a healthy goal for you, and you think you have to consider that. For me, after ghostwriting for 10 years, I knew that I wanted to do everything possible to give my book the best shot that it could have, because the reality is that it's really hard to debut a book in 2025, 2026, just because people are less willing to take chances on debuts. And people are reading a lot more, which is fantastic, but just there's a lot of competition. There's publishing is very weird. There's a lot of things kind of beyond the author's control, but I wanted to do as much as I personally could because I knew it's not that you have one shot, but I knew that if I was going to make an impact, it would be harder to do so after this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that, okay, obviously every author goes through this decision of, am I going to attempt the traditional publishing route and do all those hoops, or am I going to attempt to try to be a successful indie author and jump through all those hoops? What do you think that when you chose to do traditional publishing that you had to give up any part of the creative process, or or in your experience, because everyone has a different experience, do you think that you were able to kind of have the journey you had hoped for?
Yeah, I mean, I think to what you said, you have to weigh the pros and the cons. For me, I had a lot of people, especially after people hear that I was trying to kind of make this happen for 10 years. They're like, why didn't you just self-publish? And one, self-publishing in YA, very hard. And I know that from both sides because as a teacher, it is very hard to allow self-published YA into your classroom library. You have to vet every book that comes into your classroom library. And when you have a traditionally published book, this book has gone through editors, and oftentimes it's gotten trade reviews, and it's been seen by a lot of people, so you can feel comfortable putting it on the shelf in your library. Same thing kind of with parents, caregivers, etc. It's really hard to buy a book that hasn't gone through that vetting process and then give it to your kids. It's just hard. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And there are fabulous self-published YA books out there. But I just knew for YA, it was going to be a much harder hoop to jump through. And also, I have a day job. I have ADHD. I already have a lot that I have to do, even just through traditional publishing, to market and promote my own work. Adding in all of the other stuff that an indie author has to do, I physically could not do all of that. And my hat is off for indie authors because they do it all. But the idea that I would have to make my own cover, I would have to hire the editor, I would have to do all of those things beyond my capacity. I wanted to be able to focus on just making a really good book and then promoting that book. Like my cover, I love my cover. I didn't have to attempt anything with this. The designer came up with this, and I continue. I'm so excited to be launching my cover for my second book soon because it's so good. But I didn't have to think of anything. I didn't have to fight in Canva to try to come up with this, which it is enough to fight with Canva on the other graphics. I'm good with that. And so that kind of led to my decision. And I think every author has to make the decision that's best for them. And I'm also thrilled to see a lot of hybrid, and maybe one day that might be something. If I did self-publish adult romance, that would be one thing. But honestly, the idea of having, again, to fight in, or I guess I could pay someone to, that's kind of also an indie. You either fight the Canva fight yourself, or you pay some lovely, talented human. And I don't have pay other people money at the moment. So the dream, but
That is the dream, is to have money to pay everyone to do the things that you don't want to need to do.
yes.
But as a writer myself, and this next question is kind of like coming from me and all the aspiring authors out there, what advice would you give the aspiring authors that are writing their debut novel? Myself, I wrote 2 books, but neither of them I'm like, yeah, I'll give that to a publisher. What advice would you give us to be like able to write our debut novel and to get into writing as a career?
So you have to be able to surround yourself with people who will be honest with you and who know what they're talking about also at the same time. And that means kind of, that doesn't mean that you need people who are already authors to be part of your critique groups or something like that. But you need people who have good story instincts, and you also need the cheerleaders. You need the positivity pass. You need people who are going to be like, the best thing I've ever read in my life. Like, you are incredible. You need that. But you also need the people who are going to be like, love you, but this 200,000 word, uh, I'm being really, these are not things I would actually say to my critique partners, but like you need someone to be like, this is kind of a ripoff of Terminator 2. It's 250,000 words. This ain't going to be the one that perhaps gets you an agent. Like you need people in your life who say those things to you. And, you know, I'm really grateful for, like I mentioned, I had that critique group that left me in tears where they were like, you know, some people were like, the characters aren't working, the voice isn't working, the setting isn't working, the story isn't working. Like no one could agree, but they were willing to say those things to me so that I didn't spend all this time burning on a story that wasn't going to go anywhere. That I had people in my life who were honest about it, or I've had people who have said, this beginning doesn't grab me. And so then I went and I rewrote and then I brought it back and they said, okay, now it does. Like you need that more than anything. You need to research if you do want to get published. And that's a goal. That doesn't have to be the goal. Like I mentioned before, you could be the person that just writes to make yourself happy. But if the goal is to be published, you need to research. You need to look up, you know, what does a good query letter entail and what kind of books are being published in my genre. I will say it is personally frustrating for me, any author that wants to enter this space without also being a reader. And I don't mean you have to read every day, but if you don't have any interest in reading the books that are being published in your genre, why are you writing in that genre? And I see that honestly a lot with YA. There will be people who are like, not so much anymore because I feel like YA is a little bit on it. But for a while when YA was hot, like people are like, I just want to write YA, but kids are not very smart. And I'd be like, why are we writing books for teens if we don't think teens are smart people? And similarly, now I think it's honestly more, it'll be like a romance, like, oh, well, I want to write a silly romance or I want to write a romantasy because that's what's selling, but I don't really care about it. What? Why are you here? Why are you here? And so I think that really knowing the market that you want to write into because you love reading and you want to be a professional colleague is essential.
I agree with that. That's why my husband has gotten me into reading because he's writing a romantasy, and I was like, I don't want to read these books about. I'm not really in. I wasn't into reading, and now I'm so in. I'm so into reading now.
She didn't say the phrase, which is, I don't want to read books with dragons.
Yeah, that's what I don't
She said that so much.
But
Why
then
don't you want to read books with dragons? Books with dragons are incredible. But no, I
now I know. I know.
digress.
I did not know before, but now I know. And my husband's like always bringing new books to me. People laugh, but he's the one that brought, if you've heard of Sarah J. Maas, like ACOTAR, Crescent City, like Throne of Glass, he brought those to me. And so I love that he's so into romantasy and he's going to write a romantasy, but people are like, but he's like a guy. And I'm like, but he's really good at it. And he, just wait, okay, people, and I love exploring the books with him.
This sounds like a real life book written by a woman in the best way, in the most complimentary way, like brought to life. This is what you should strive for. So well done is what I say. So.
Thank you. What is your long-term vision for your writing career? We stalked your website, and so we saw that you do have a book coming out fall of this year, right? But you mentioned it, and so obviously you've got more books coming out. So what is your vision for your writing career moving forward?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about We're All Gonna Die Tonight! Exclamation point is is another YA film. I feel like the exclamation point is key. We're all gonna die tonight, but we're gonna have a great time. And I'm really excited about that as a YA thriller. I do actually have two books coming out, but one of them is under a secret pen name. But that is a cozy adult romance fantasy, and so it's been really fun to jump because they're both in the same season. So it's one day I'm working on murder and blood and chaos, and one day I'm working on dragons and other things I can't say, but like lots of fun and tea, a lot of tea. And I like switching. And one thing that was really nice about ghostwriting is I was not put into a genre box because I was writing it all. And I love that. And I want that for my career. I love writing thrillers, but I don't just write thrillers. And so I would love to publish in multiple genres. I would love for readers to just know, you know, when they pick up a Veronica Bane book, that it's going to be a good time. It's probably going to have a mouthy female protagonist. It's probably going to have, you know, some dark humor. Like I want there to be things that are always in my work, but I don't want it to be that I'm confined to a single genre.
Yeah, that makes me think of Allie Hazelwood. So we read her book that just came out last year, Mate, and we read Bride. But she usually
I read
writes
Bride. I did not read
she
Mate.
usually writes like women in STEM romance books, and her voice is so funny. Like, and I saw that in the kind of more fantasy vibe of the book, and so I love that she wrote all those, but like her funny humor voice carried through all of her work. And so I agree that when you see an author, a repeat author, you're like, I know I can trust that when I pick up an Allie Hazelwood book, I'm getting funny, or like I know what I'm getting with this author, and that they don't like change personalities through the
Mhm.
Yeah.
genres, but give me what I'm needing in the different genres.
And
Yeah.
honestly, with Difficult Girls, I'm so okay if you just like write a bunch of books like that one because like picking that up and then having like I was talking to her like all like the female characters in it were just
Yeah,
great.
they
So
were
like
so great.
if you
Thank
keep
you.
that, see, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
what hopes do you have that your work contributes to like the genre that you're writing in, or just to the readers that are reading it?
I mean, I hope that anyone reading my books, I hope that they enjoy it. I hope that they get to go. That sounds so foundational, but I think that reading can be something that transports you. It can be a good time. It can be something that also makes you think at the same time. I mean, Greta in Difficult Girls, she doesn't have a very good time for a lot of the book, but I think that she learns a lot of things about herself. And I want to tell books that feel authentic to the human experience. I want to tell books about where people act the way I would have or the way I know other people would, and that is where I mentioned some people find, I feel like when they read YA, they sometimes expect these teenage characters to act like adults and they forget just how often teens make terrible decisions and mistakes. As a high school English teacher, I see that they make mistakes a lot, all the time. And so I wanted to tell a teen character that felt authentically teen and that she wanted things and that she wanted things she shouldn't have wanted, but you don't know until you've gone through it that that's bad for you. And so I hope that whenever people read my books that they see characters who make maybe them feel seen. I had people tell me Greta um, was giving off ADHD vibes. When I first wrote the first draft of this book, I did not know that I had ADHD. I was diagnosed later. And so when folks said that, I was like, that would make sense because I gave her a lot of my ADHD qualities. So perhaps that could have just been how I was diagnosed rather than torturing myself about it for so long. But it meant a lot to me to have people say that they felt seen by the things that Greta thinks and feels and does. And that's a really powerful moment as an author. So I hope that in all of my characters, maybe not certain characters, that people see themselves in them.
I definitely was telling Beck, I was like, I was brought back to 16-year-old Lydia exploring high school, and I was like, if this was an adult, some of the thoughts I'd be like, why? That's not realistic.
Yeah.
But I was like, that's so realistic. The reactions that she had in some of those scenes, her like internal dialogue, I was like, yes, I had this internal dialogue when I was 16, and so that's why I was like sometimes cringing reading the book because I was like, this is so accurate, it hurts.
And it's so refreshing though because we do see a lot of books and lots of TV shows and movies where it's like a 16-year-old, 18-year-old character and they're acting like they're 25, have all this life experience, they're making the same choices that an adult character would. But like reading this book, you really got into like, nope, this is very realistic. This is right. This feels right.
This was great.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that at 16 I had known better and made better decisions about certain things. But, again, I'll have students, where I'll see them in the back of the room, like, mash up a paper ball and they'll like hold up the paper ball and they'll look across the room and they'll look at me and they'll look and they'll be like, I shouldn't throw the paper ball. And like, we see each other. We see like, yeah, no, that's a bad choice. Don't throw it. And yet they can't help themselves. They still throw the ball. And I think that that's very indicative of a lot of things that teens do. And like you said, it does make you cringe because you're like, girl, stop. Like this, This man could not be waving any more red flags. He is a red flag. He's decorated in that. And yet she's like, no, this is it. This is true love. I'm ready. So
True love of high school.
I've just been there, done that. And so I was like, she's calling me out. Um, so, what compels you to write, and why do you think it's important for people to share stories?
I think we feel less alone when we share stories. We also get to experience things that we wouldn't experience otherwise. There's a classic, books as a teacher, you want to put books in front of your students that are both, windows and mirrors, stories that happen outside of their world where they can see another part, and obviously stories that reflect their personal communities and again, make them feel understood. And I think that's a good thing for all of us to have. I would hope that, you know, I love to read widely across genres, age ranges, etc. And there is something to be had in kind of every corner of the literary world.
I do. I tell Beck all the time. I think every podcast episode I have to say, like, there's a time and a place for all the stories. Some people like compare, like, that book's just like that book, but I'm like, but there's a time and a place for all the different stories that are being told, and I love all of them. I'm like here for all the times and places for the stories. Okay, now we want to jump into talking about difficult girls. This is spoiler free. This is just going to be giving people a little taste of what they might get if they read this book, if they haven't read it yet.
So, yes, the first question on this is, what is the elevator pitch to your reader?
So the elevator pitch for Difficult Girls is a teenage girl gets what she thinks is her dream job at a local theme park, only for it to turn into a nightmare when a performer goes missing, and she may have been the last person to see her alive.
That does sum up the book. Okay, if readers enjoy these three books, then they'll enjoy your book.
So if readers enjoyed a Good Girl's Guide to Murder, One of Us is Lying, or Murderland, they will enjoy Difficult Girls.
That's accurate, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What was your inspiration for writing this book?
My inspiration for writing this book is I worked at a theme park when I was growing up as a teen. I started off as an usher, and then I also started working as a princess face character and a witch face character. And I realized pretty early that the entertainment department of a theme park is a little bit of a microcosm for the entertainment world as a whole. And kind of, I was watching when I first wrote the book, these awful things happen, with Harvey Weinstein in the news, and there weren't those levels of awful things, but there were awful things happening, I realized, in kind of all corners of the entertainment industry. And I realized I could really represent those things in a story about the entertainment department of a theme park.
What emotional experience do you want your readers to walk away with?
In terms of an emotional experience when one is reading Difficult Girls, it sounds a little cliche, but I want you to go on a roller coaster. I want you to be riding a high with Greta and, going through these great experiences that she has. And then I want you to be brought down and scared about someone killing you in the book. And I want you to go through that.
Personally, I was like, maybe I know what's gonna happen here, and then there was times where I had to put the book down because I was like, oh no, I know what you're doing. Calm down. Let's not do this. And then I was like, no, 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 not this character, not this character, not this character. And then at the end, I was like, oh, okay, that was so satisfying.
Yeah,
So I definitely
it's
want that
great.
roller coaster.
I'm glad. I do. It is a very roller coaster book. So
What did you have to research that sent you down a rabbit hole?
So when you're a thriller writer, your search history is, heaven forbid anybody look at it because it's got some wild things. Because you have to literally figure out, not for Difficult Girls, but for my second book, I had to look up things like where in the leg could a person be stabbed and live, but not live for long. Things, that again, you're like, please search history. Come with the caveat that I am a thriller author. But in terms of my search history for Difficult Girls, I had to research since I was in the entertainment department, I had to do a little bit of research on ride operations. So I had to watch like how they would operate a ride because I did not work in that section for a specific part of the book. I watched a lot of videos of gondolas. So a gondola is a key ride in the book. It looks a little bit like a ski lift. It goes above a park. So these are at a few different parks. There's one at, I believe, the Safari Park in San Diego. And I had to watch how those rides operated because I know you said spoiler free. This is a tiny spoiler, but it's at the beginning of the book. Prior to Greta working at Hyperkid Magic Land, there is a character who is killed and her body is found in a gondola. And the way that she's discovered is a character is sweeping up and feels a drop of what he thinks is rain on his cheek. And he looks up and realizes it is not rain, but it is in fact blood. And so I needed to look for things like, is there a spot on a gondola ride where blood could come out? So things like that. And then I did have to interview a firefighter and ask about how flammable Axe body spray is. But I won't say any more. It is, by the way, it is very flammable.
I need to read this book. Why do we need to know this about Axe body spray? What theme or experience from your real life made its way into these characters besides the theme park?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of what experience I had that made it into the book, obviously all of the theme park stuff. I mean, cleaning up protein spills, all of that, but I think the one that stands out that's adjacent to the theme park experience is as a teacher, every year I have to watch a video on bloodborne pathogens and how the crux of this, I think it's like an hour-long video that we have to watch every year and take a test on, is don't touch blood. Like when in doubt, assume it's blood, which I put into, I believe it's the second chapter where Greta is looking at something and her trainer is saying, when in doubt, assume it's blood. It's essentially a push pop, but she has to assume that it's blood before dealing with it because it might be contaminated. And that line actually made it as the tagline, which I just, whenever I talk to any other teachers, I'm like, do you recognize something? Because again, we take a test on it literally every year. So.
Any like
Yeah, I didn't know that, like, that you had to take a class on it. It makes sense because, I mean, I grew up with a mom that was a nurse, so, like, I learned, like, don't touch these things, don't touch blood. If you see a needle in public, do not go near it. Like, so it makes sense. But this is the part that, how can readers connect with you? How can they support you? How can we support you? Just any way to reach out and to be able to support you and the book.
So if you want to support me and my writing career, following me on any social media, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, etc., is always great because that's where I'm going to post a lot of stuff. Pre-ordering books whenever possible. It supports any author, but especially authors that are new in their career. So what I think a lot of people don't know is that a lot of our support from our publisher is determined based on pre-orders. And so you can literally make a huge difference in an author's career. For example, I would never have been able to hit the USA Today bestseller list if if readers had not pre-ordered my book, because that showed bookstores that there was an interest. So then they put more copies in their stores so people could buy it the week of. So whenever possible, if you can pre-order a book, obviously that is not financially feasible for everyone. But if you request a copy of the book at your local library and the library decides to order a book, we do get paid for that. That does count as a sale for us. So please request books from your libraries. I know also Difficult Girls, the paperback, is coming out in July. So if it was not in your price point as a hardcover, but you do love a paperback, it does come out in paperback in July. But yeah, pre-order, add to your Goodreads or Storygraph or Fable, or I feel like there is a new TBR app every day, but add the books to those because those numbers also publishers look at, and that helps determine if there's interest for a book and if they will throw a little bit more support behind it. So yeah.
Actually, and great to hear about the paperback because I actually don't own a physical copy, so I will be getting one of those.
Yes. Okay, so this is the wrap up of the spoiler-free section. Next, we're going to move into asking Veronica Bane spoiler questions about the book.